All right, Matthew chapter number 7. Matthew chapter number 7, verse 7 through 11. Matthew 7, verse 7 through 11. The reason we're having to keep this door open, I found out last week when you close it, it cuts the cold air off. That's really got so hot in here. So by leaving the door open, hopefully it won't get so hot.
I guess that bend a little bit might help.
Okay, good. Thank you. Amen. Matthew 7, verse number 7. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and him that knocketh it shall be opened. Or what man is there of you, whom if a son ask bread, will give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? Well, first thing I want to explain what these verses do not mean, because these verses are used by the Word of Faith, claim it, promise type movement, use this to claim material prosperity. First of all, you have to understand that chapter 5, 6, and 7 is what? It's the Sermon on the Mount. What was the situation that created the need for the Sermon on the Mount? There was no spirituality left in Judaism. It was all external. Their temple, their goal, their hierarchy, their this, that, and the other. Wasn't anything spiritual about it anymore. The heart was gone out of the whole situation. That's the reason for the Sermon on the Mount. Now in chapter 6, it does talk about God meeting our needs. But that's what he's talking about. He's talking about food and clothing. He's not talking about anybody getting rich. As a matter of fact, in chapter 6, Jesus plainly says, do not lay up treasures on earth. Lay them up in heaven. And so these verses are being used just the opposite of what the Lord intended. And the problem was, and he was addressing especially the religious leadership of his day, and of course the people were just like it, who everything was about, don't do this or do that or don't do this. And there wasn't anything spiritual about it anymore. The heart had gone completely out of it. In other words, these verses, the Lord intended to be used for our spiritual good. So the first thing I wanted to do is explain what these verses do not mean. Now let's talk about what they mean and why this is the introduction to our subject tonight. The subject tonight is importunity. Now, what is importunity in prayer? Well, the other day, right over here in this garage, I saw the most wonderful illustration of importunity. So I'm going to explain importunity by picking on the lawnmower repair team of Kenneth and Kenneth. Me or somebody else, the riding lawnmower wasn't straight anymore. It was cattywampus, whatever that means. And it didn't look very good when you mowed, so we all got together after we mowed the other day out there in the garage. Now when I say we all got together, we had the thing lifted up and all I did was stand on a support piece to make sure it doesn't move and fall on those two guys. That was my total involvement. But I got to learn a wonderful lesson from those two men about importunity. They got to looking at it and they saw that it wasn't straight, and we took the blades off, and we got to looking, and finally they said, no, this has to come off. So they worked and they worked and they worked and they got it off. And then they looked some more and they saw, well, this has got to come off. And so they worked and worked and worked and got that thing off. And finally they decided the whole deck has to come off because they thought it may be crooked. And I mean, they worked and they worked and they worked. They finally got it off. And then our brilliant team decided it was just the blades. None of that had to come off.
Thanks a lot.
So, of course, what comes down must go up. So they started to put back together, and there was one thing that they took off. It was the thing that held up the deck. They weren't paying attention how they took the things out.
Yeah.
And they worked, and they worked, and they worked, and finally Brother Hunt said, I have got to go haul hay. And he wobbled off to his truck, wringing, sweaty, wet, and left. And Brother Tuggle was there. I'm still standing in that one position because I can't move or the mower would fall on him. And there he's under that thing, and he keeps saying, I hate giving up, I hate giving up, I hate giving up, I hate giving up. He finally got it back together. Except the blades, which he had to go buy some. That's importunity. I hate giving up. He said, I don't know how many times he said, I hate giving up on a job that isn't done. I hate giving up till I've been finished. That's importunity. Now you understand that applies to everything in life. But of course, our study is prayer. And that's what this says. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened. You've gone from asking to being more intense, seeking, to being more intense, knocking. And it shall be opened unto you. Can we be honest with each other? We hear of things we ought to be praying for, and there's things on our heart, but if we're not careful, we'll pray about that once or twice or 3 times or 4 times. And before you know it, whether we even realize it or not, we're not praying for that anymore. Everyone that asketh receiveth, he that seeks finds, and him that knocketh, it shall be opened. 1 John 2:6, Jesus taught us, he that saith he abideth in him ought himself to walk as Jesus walked. And when you look at the prayer life of the Lord, you find several patterns. Early, and not just for 20 minutes, for hours. Sometimes all night. In the garden 3 times, he prayed the same thing, thy will. And there are 2 illustrations that Jesus personally gave on the subject of importunity. So let's turn to those. The first one is Luke 11. They're both in Luke. I've made reference to these, but have not really totally studied them. Now, you're going to see Luke 11, number 5. And if you have an outline Bible, it's marked, the parable of the importunate friend. And Jesus said unto them, which of you shall have a friend, and shall go unto him at midnight, and say unto him, friend, lend me 3 loaves. Okay, I got to stop there and explain something. If we're going to have company, we cook a meal and then tell them when to be there. Right? Not in the Eastern culture. First of all, their main meals, and same thing in Greece and some of those other cultures, the big meal is 9, 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock at night. That's their culture. Their culture also is, if somebody comes knocking on your door at midnight, it's culturally acceptable in that world. You get out of bed, you invite them in, and then the lady goes to the kitchen and fixes a meal. Watch it. Watch it. So you have to understand that this, what looks like just a parable to us, is actually real life at the time the Lord told it. For a friend of mine in his journey has come to me, and I have nothing to set before him. Remember, folks, no Jake and Dorothy's, no Granny Clark's, no Allsups to get a burrito. If somebody ate, it was at somebody's house. So when somebody came, you got them cooked, period, end of subject. Now the man from within was not too interested. And he from within shall answer and say, trouble me not, the door is now shut, my kids are with me in bed, I cannot rise and give thee. In other words, the man made every excuse in the world. I say unto you, though he will not rise and give him because he is his friend, yet because of his importunity, he will rise and give him as many as he needeth. In other words, the man just kept knocking. The man just kept knocking. He wasn't going to quit knocking until that other guy got out of bed and helped him feed the friend that had come. And then a repeat of what I just read out of Matthew. And I say unto you, ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. That's importunity. When I began early Monday morning, because I knew I was going to be out of it for a while, so I did most of this really early Monday morning, I was amazed. I had forgotten how many stories and how much teaching there is in the Bible on importunity in prayer. I mean, there's story after story after story after story. That leads me to believe, apparently, we all have a real problem with that. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I know I do. I know I do. So, apparently, this is a needed teaching. Now then, the other one I referred to last week, but let's look at it again in the setting of today. And now the Lord speaks a parable unto them in Luke 18, to this end. The purpose of the story he is going to tell is to remind men always to pray and not to faint. In other words, don't give up. So, it's clear from the Bible, we all have a problem with staying with it. Like Brother Tuttle said under that mower, I hate giving up before the thing is done. Here's the story. I say there wasn't a city of judge which feared not God, neither regarded man. I think that probably describes the vast majority of civil leaders today. There was a widow in that city, and she came to him and she said, avenge me of mine adversary. Now, there is nothing said about what the lady's problem was other than this: avenge me of mine adversary. Somebody had done her wrong. Somebody was somehow, some way trying to hurt her. Well, it's good that the Bible records it only this way, because folks, we've got an enemy that is trying to hurt us and trying to hurt our church. Satan. And because he was not a good judge, he would not for a while. Now listen, but afterward he said within himself, I don't fear God, I don't care about man. Yet because this widow troubleth me. In other words, she came back to see him every day. I will avenge her. Hear her case, give her a verdict, lest by her continual coming she weary me. That's a human illustration to make a spiritual point. You can never weary God by your continual coming. Okay? You can't. And the Lord said, hear what the unjust judge said. And shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them? Among other things, this verse says there's something you just got to keep praying, that God's not going to answer the first time you pray. By the way, if God did, our prayer life would be sorrier as all get out. If it was that easy. I tell you that he will avenge them speedily or suddenly. And here's the settlement. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth? Now, faith here is not saving faith, though it is included, but it is the faith of the Scriptures. Now, folks, surely you will agree with me. Oh, we need a revival of prayer warriors. Prayer warriors. We live in such a fast society. We are so busy running and going and doing that none of us have or take the time that we ought to take to be serious with God in our prayer life. Importunity. I just jotted down a few of many great Bible stories about importunate praying. You remember Abraham, when the angels told him that they were going to burn up Sodom and Gomorrah, and his nephew Lot was in there, and he went to praying. He said, God, you're not really going to, would you really destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now, he wasn't a good Christian, but he was saved. He was saved. Lot was saved. And Abraham just kept interceding and kept interceding and kept interceding until finally God said, okay, Abraham, if there's 10 Christians in Sodom and Gomorrah, I won't burn the place up. Well, there weren't. Lot didn't even win all of his own family. It's a great prayer story. What about Moses going up to meet with God and prayed for 40? He stayed up there in the presence of God for 40 days and nights. And that was prayer time. And then Daniel, to get the visions, the final vision of the final world empire of the Antichrist, and after that the coming of Christ, he stayed home and had a 3-week prayer meeting. And then Paul, loved this story. Paul in Acts chapter 27, on the ship, a prisoner, going to Rome. Everybody on deck tossing everything overboard, trying to keep the ship from sinking, which eventually broke up anyway. Where was Paul for hours? He was in the belly of the ship praying. Do you realize that Paul did more good? One praying man did more good to save the ship and all those lives than 250 men on deck fighting to save the ship. And you know I love this church, this verse, this little Epaphras, whoever he was, a helper of Paul. He says in Colossians 4:12, a servant of Jesus Christ, always, importunity, I can't give up, always laboring fervently for you, the church at Colossae, that ye, those believers there, may stand perfect and complete in all the will of But I left my all-time favorite story of a prayer meeting that exemplifies importunity. Now I want you to turn to Genesis number 32. Genesis number 32. It's about Jacob. And while you're turning there, let me just review Jacob a little. Jacob means supplanter, or a tricky one, or a deceiver, or a liar. He had to come out on top of a bargain by hook or crook. And trying to get his way about everything. By the time he turned to about 18, he had so manipulated and disrupted and lied and deceived at home till his mother had to send him out of the country to her family in another country, her brother Laban. And the last thing he heard from home was the brother that he had cheated said, when after Daddy's dead, I'm going to kill you. Well, 20 years go by, and he is with Laban all those years, and he serves Laban. And again, the same thing, hook or crook. He always had to come out on top of a bargain, no matter what the cost. Didn't matter how many lies he had to tell. And after 20 years, God comes to him and he says, you need to go home. Well, what happened is, by that time, Laban hated him, and all of Laban's kids hated him because he had gotten rich, and that's another story, mostly by hook and crook. Well, now he's burned all his bridges. There's no place to go. So he packs everything up, his family, his wife, his kids, his household, his livestock, and he heads back to the homeland, totally in fear and trembling. And finally he gets to a river that is a border, and he puts the kids, the wives, the servants, the livestock, and everything on the home side of the border, and he comes back, before going there in the morning, he comes back at night to this side of the river, and there's a prayer meeting. Just him and the Lord and an angel. I want to read it to you. Chapter 32, beginning in verse number 24. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. Now, this is spiritual wrestling. At the end, it's also physical. And by the way, when you really wrestle with God, it gets physical. Did the Lord not break out in sweat of blood in the garden, praying? And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, that is, the angel, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Sometimes God won't hear our prayers till he breaks us. Not our bones, but spiritually. And he said, let me go. The angel said, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go except thou bless me. Brother Tuggle, that's you saying, I don't want to quit. I don't want to quit till I fix this thing over there in that garage. I will not let thee go except thou bless me. And you know, I have to answer that in my own soul, and you got to answer in your own soul. But do we pray like that? And he said unto him, what's thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be no more Jacob, but Israel, for as, which means prince, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. You see, Jacob couldn't make peace with his brother. He couldn't prevail against his brother. He couldn't win and make right all the stuff he had done wrong until he first got right with God. And he first had to get power with God. And when you have power with God, you have power with men. And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore dost thou ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the place Peniel, which means preserver of life. For I've seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Let me make a real quick but simple three-point application. Our first business as believers is to get the face of God. And then we can do better with men. I want to apply secondly to our church. As a church, we need to get the face of God. Because only God can take care of what we need. And I want to say thirdly, America needs to seek the face of God. Because only God can face the problems we have. Importunity won the battle. Now when the disciples saw Jesus pray, is it any wonder they said, Lord, teach us to pray? We never arrive in our prayer life. It's a struggle all of our lives, but it does get better and better and better. So, importunity. Brother Kenneth and Brother Kenneth, thank you for the good illustration. And I mean that in a very positive way. Amen.